It is time for some MLB trade deadline grades. We're going to give every team a grade: F, D, C, B, A, and S. So if you get to the S tier, that means you had a great trade deadline. If you got to the A tier, it means you had a good trade deadline, just maybe not enough for the S tier. B tier means that you did an above average trade deadline, but not something that makes me just want to watch your team more, if that makes any sense. C is average, D is below average, and F means you either didn't do anything or just screwed up the trade royally. So, let's go ahead and get into this video. Make sure you drop a like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, by the way, so you get notified whenever I upload a video. Let's try to get this video to 9 likes, and let's go ahead and get into this video. So, for the Mariners, they had a trade deadline that was expected, sale. But they did do a good trade. They got Taylor Trammell, Luis Torrens, Andrews Munoz, and Ty France. Now, they did trade away Daniel Vogelbach and Taekwon Walker for pretty much nothing. So for that, they took 2 L's and 1 W, in my opinion. So if you're looking at that, they have to go right into the D tier. I like the potential that they have with Taylor Trammell, Luis Torrens, Andrews Munoz, and Ty France. I like that a lot, but the Mariners took 1 W and 2 L's. I think they won the trade with the Padres. It seems like a lot to be giving up for the Padres. Taekwon Walker and Daniel Vogelbach were not parts of their team for the future. We know that. Next is the Toronto Blue Jays, who got Taekwon Walker and Robbie Ray. Were their big pieces at the trade deadline. They gave up Travis Bergen and cash considerations. And they got Jonathan Villar from the Marlins for a player to be named later. They had some big W's at the trade deadline. Taekwon Walker's a good player. Jonathan Villar is a good player. And Robbie Ray's a good player. So in this trade, I have to put the Blue Jays at A tier. They're one of the few teams, obviously besides the Padres, who we'll go ahead and rank the Padres right now. They go in the S tier. They got Jason Castro. They got Austin Nola. They got Dan Ativola. I can't pronounce his name. I'm sorry, I can't pronounce it. They got Greg Allen, Mike Clevenger. They got Austin Adams. They got Jason Castro. They got Mitch Moreland. They got Trevor Rosenthal. They got so many good players at the trade deadline. They go into the S tier. Miami Marlins. The Marlins were a team that got Starling Marte. They traded Jonathan Villar to the Blue Jays. I think they took a big L. Jonathan Villar for a player to be named later. That seems not like much to me. But you got Starling Marte, who's a good player, who fits well with this team. He's a veteran. He fits good with this team. So 1 W, 1 L. That gives them right into the C tier. I think you could have got more for Jonathan Villar. But you didn't. And you got Starling Marte for not much, in my opinion, for Caleb Smith. Caleb Smith is a good arm, and Humberto Mejia, and a player to be named later. Caleb Smith is a good arm, but he's not a player that I'm like, man, they screwed up the trade because they gave up Caleb Smith. Next is the Yankees. They go straight into the F tier. Boy, did they have a bad trade deadline. And I say that because they were rumored to get Lynn, Clevenger, Minor, Bundy, one of the big four, I guess you could say. And they got neither of them. They did nothing. They traded David Hale, was the only move they did at the trade deadline. Isn't this 2 trade deadlines in a row that they've done nothing? Pretty disappointing. F tier. Braves, F tier. This team made the trade deadline was miserable as a Braves fan. There was rumors we were going to get Lance Lynn, and we were front runners for Mike Clevenger, which that story changed about 4 times, by the way. From the White Sox, Padres, it was the Yankees, then it was the Padres, then it was the White Sox, then it was the Braves, and then it was back to the Padres, obviously, because they traded for him. So that was a confused story. Rays, they didn't do anything at the trade deadline. They did nothing at the trade deadline. The Rays did nothing, and they traded Jose Martinez, which was a big L, for 2 players to be named later. Neither of those are going to be big prospects. They get to go into the F tier 2 for me. They had a terrible trade deadline. They were rumored Joey Gallo, but that didn't happen. But whatever. Cardinals did not do anything at the trade deadline. Yeah, they did nothing at the trade deadline. They were very disappointing too, so they get to go into the F tier. Now there's going to be a lot of F tier teams because like half the teams didn't do anything. So Houston Astros F tier, they didn't do anything. They needed starting pitching and relief pitching. They did nothing. Orioles, this is a team that did make some moves. They traded away Michael Givens from the Orioles for Tyler Nevin and Terrin Vavra and a player to be named later. I really like that trade for the Orioles a lot. And they traded Miguel Castro for pretty much nothing to the Mets. Well, for Kevin Smith, who's a pitcher, which is not going to make a lot of impact. But I have to put them in B tier. I think they had a really good trade deadline. They got Terrin Vavra and Tyler Nevin, which I think are two very good players. Cleveland, they had a trade deadline that is interesting, obviously, because they got Cal Quantrill, Austin Hedges, Josh Naylor, Gabriel Arias, Joey Catino, and Owen Miller. All players that I think are really good, and I think they're going to be the long-term winners of this trade. But as of right now, I think it's kind of confusing because they didn't get their outfield help, which I think they could have got. They got Josh Naylor, but they didn't get outfield help. But I think for the potential, I have to go with B. Now, I obviously could go with C here, and I say that just because I mean, I could go with the C. Rockies. At the trade deadline, they got Michael Givens and Kevin Pillar, two good players. I think they traded a lot with Terrin Vavra and Tyler Nevin, though. And I'm going to say that because I think those are two very good players. And those were their two moves at the trade deadline. I think they both were good moves for a win-now team. And the Rockies are a win-now team. I think they overpaid a lot for Michael Givens, if you want my opinion. Kevin Pillar, they got on the very good cheap. So for that, I think they had 1 W, 1 L. I'm going to put them in the C tier. They did an average trade deadline. The Tigers. What did the Tigers do at the trade deadline? I don't think they did anything at the trade deadline. They did nothing. So, I mean, F tier, they did nothing. So, how can I put them anywhere higher? Royals, they got Luis Fox. For Brett Phillips, I think he's a better player. So, for that reason, I mean, C tier. I mean, whatever. Brewers at the trade deadline. The Brewers I don't think they made a deal. Oh, the Tigers, they traded away Cameron Maybin. Still going F. I mean, whatever. Let's see here. Milwaukee Brewers. Brewers did nothing at the trade deadline. They didn't do anything at the trade deadline. Yeah, I mean, wow, what another disappointing trade deadline for the Brewers. F tier. Wow, you need pitching, and you just like the Yankees 2 years in a row, no pitching. Angels F tier. You trade away Tommy La Stella for Franklin Barreto. That just doesn't cut it for me. Brian Goodwin, you traded him away for Packy Naughton. I mean, I've never heard of him. Why couldn't we have got Nick Senzel back? Is what I'm wondering. Obviously, Nick Senzel has some better value than that. But the Angels, man, they had a bad trade deadline. They didn't trade away Dylan Bundy, and I think personally, Dylan Bundy, this is the only year he's going to have value. The Oakland Athletics, they're an AS tier because they did really good. They got Mike Minor and Tommy La Stella. Wasn't Mike Minor an all-star last year? I think Mike Minor was an all-star last year. Let me see. I think he was an all-star last year. I think he was an all-star. Yeah, he was an all-star last year. You got 2 all-stars for nothing? A's getting S tier for me. They did a lot at the trade deadline to improve their team. Phillies, they got Brandon Workman and Heath Hembry. I think they go into the A tier too. They addressed pitching, mainly relief pitching, and they did good. Pirates, they really are in the F tier badly. Because you did trade Joe Musgrove. You did nothing. I mean, you should have traded Joe Musgrove, Trevor Williams, anything that you could have got value for. Rangers, you traded Mike Minor, but you kept Lance Lynn. I don't like that. But the Rangers, I mean, D tier. I mean, they did make a move. D tier. I mean, whatever. Red Sox. I know the prospects that they got back. A lot of people think they're pretty good. I disagree. I'm gonna go and say that I disagree. I don't think they're as good as people are hyping them as. The Red Sox, they traded Kevin Pillar for a player to be named later in international bonus pool money, and they traded Josh Osich as well. So I think for the Red Sox, they have to go into the D tier for me. Like they did make moves to get them above the F tier. The Giants, F tier too. I mean, they made no moves. They're a team that's definitely not ready to compete now, and they didn't even make any moves to help that. So that just doesn't make. I mean, why? Just my gosh. Dodgers. Dodgers did nothing at the trade deadline. They did absolutely nothing at the trade deadline. So F tier, very disappointing. They were rumored to get a starting pitcher. They didn't. The Diamondbacks, they traded away Starling Marte, Andrew Chafin. They also traded away Archie Bradley to the Reds. They had a selling trade deadline. That's what we expected. Robbie Ray, they also traded him. They had a big L at the trade deadline. They took a lot of L's. D tier. Barely above F. Mets, now they did make some moves. They got Todd Frazier back, Robinson Chirinos, and Miguel Castro. The Mets, this may be controversial, but I like their moves a lot for A tier. Robinson Chirinos is a great backup catcher behind Wilson Ramos, I think. He's been bad to start the year, but that's almost good, if that makes any sense for the Mets, because you got him on a cheap price. I think you could have got a Mike Minor too from the Rangers, but they got Todd Frazier back, who I think is a decent player. Like, I'm not saying he's a great player, but decent. Miguel Castro is a big arm out of that bullpen, I think. White Sox. F tier. They disappointed. They disappointed terribly. They need pitching, and they didn't address it at all. Like, they did nothing. Oh, and the Phillies, they got David Phelps, by the way. Twins, F. They needed starting pitching, and they didn't. They did nothing. But the Cubs had a sneaky trade deadline. They got Andrew Chafin. They got Andrew Chafin. They got who else? Josh Osich and Kyle Ryan. I think the right-handed pitching still leaves something to desire for this team. But going off their trade deadline, I think they get a B tier. I don't think they made moves that are going to impact their team a ton, but I think it's a good move. Nationals, F. A lot of teams in the F. Nationals didn't do anything. That's Brewers did make a trade. They traded David Phelps to the Phillies, which still doesn't make me want to put them out of F tier. And the Reds, they're our last team. They go into the S tier too. I think they had a very good trade deadline. They got Archie Bradley. They got Brian Goodwin, who I think is a good sneaky move for them. So they got two players that are good, I think. But yeah, those are my rankings for the 2020 MLB trade deadline grades. So make sure you drop a like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you get notified whenever I upload a video. Let's try to get this video to 9 likes. I think that's what I said at the start of the video. Yeah, but those are my grades. Thank you for watching, and I'll be